Let's talk about Armenia. When you hear that name, you might picture these ancient monasteries kind of clinging to the side of cliffs. Amazing scenery. But the real story is so much deeper. Today, we're going to dive into an incredible 3,000-year history. It's a story of innovation, faith, and frankly, unbelievable resilience.
Okay, let's just kick things off with a fact that totally reframes Armenia's place in history. You see, their decision to adopt Christianity wasn't some late-in-the-game development. Nope, they were the first nation in the world to do it. Think about that. Decades before the Roman Empire, this single move set them on a completely unique path and became the very bedrock of who they are.
So, to really understand Armenia, we have to go back, way back, to the very beginning. Let's dig into the deep, deep roots that anchored this identity, long before the Christian era even kicked off.
And this timeline just shows you the sheer depth of civilization we're talking about here. This isn't a few centuries, we're talking millennia. From these incredibly advanced metalworkers of the Kuta-Araxes culture, to the powerful kingdom of Urartu, and then the rise of the first real, centralized Armenian state. This land was a hotbed of innovation.
Now check out these Urartians. They were absolute masters of their environment. They built these massive fortresses and crazy complex irrigation systems, some of which actually still work today. That tells you this was a highly organized, technologically advanced society that figured out how to tame a really rugged landscape.
So we've got these ancient foundations all set up, but this number right here, 301 AD, this represents the single most defining moment in Armenian history. It's the event that would change its course forever.
And look, this wasn't just about changing religions. It was a massive political statement. By embracing Christianity, Armenia basically drew a line in the sand, setting itself apart from its powerful neighbors. The Armenian Apostolic Church became way more than just a religious thing. It became the guardian of the nation's language, its culture, its entire identity through centuries and centuries of chaos. So, here's the crucial point. This unique Christian identity, it wasn't forged in some peaceful, isolated valley. No, it was hammered into shape on the anvil of geopolitics, caught in a constant, brutal tug-of-war between the world's biggest empires. Being at a crossroads is great for trade, but it's an absolute curse in wartime. For centuries, Armenia was the prize and the battlefield for a whole parade of empires. This constant state of being invaded and occupied forged this deep, profound sense of resilience that would get tested again and again and again. This really shows you the difficult tightrope Armenian communities had to walk. Under the Ottomans, yeah, they had religious freedom, but they were treated like second-class citizens. Under the Persians, the pressure could be even worse, sometimes with forced conversions. They had to constantly navigate these really different but always challenging types of foreign rule. And this event, the Battle of Avarai, just captures that spirit perfectly. The Armenians were massively outnumbered. They were defeated on the battlefield, sure, but their resistance was so fierce that the Persians just gave up on the idea of forcibly converting them. So it became this huge moral victory, a symbol that their spirit, their culture was basically unbreakable. This long, long history of struggle and just holding on brings us to the 20th century. And to the first great tragedy of that era, an event that would forever scar the Armenian soul. The context here is just absolutely critical. The Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe as they called it, was crumbling. An ultra-nationalist government, the Young Turks, took over. And fueled by losses in World War I and this radical new ideology, they started seeing their own Christian Armenian citizens not as people, but as some kind of internal threat.
And make no mistake, this was not some chaotic accident of war. As this slide shows, it was a meticulously planned, state-run operation. It started by cutting the head off the snake, arresting all the community leaders on April 24, 1915. They passed a law to make it seem legal, and then came the brutal death marches and the systematic massacres.
Between 1915 and 1923, an estimated 1.5 million Armenians were systematically murdered. The Ottoman state and its agents basically wiped out the vast majority of the empire's Armenian population, erasing them from lands they'd lived on for thousands of years.
So the world knew, but tragically, it was ineffective. This statement from the Allies was actually one of the very first times the phrase crimes against humanity was ever used in international diplomacy. But with the whole world at war, saying something didn't lead to doing anything. Out of the absolute ashes of this genocide and the collapse of whole empires, the 20th century brought yet another dramatic, turbulent chapter to the Armenian story.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It's enough to give you whiplash. A brief, desperate shot at independence in 1918, crushed just 2 years later by the Red Army. Then, boom, 70 years as a Soviet republic, before finally, in 1991, independence comes around once more. Life in Soviet Armenia was this really strange paradox. On one hand, you got industrialization, science, and almost everyone learned to read. But on the other hand, it came at the cost of freedom, with brutal political repression and the terror of Stalin's purges. For 70 years, Armenian identity had to survive inside the rigid box of the communist state.
So, independence in 1991 wasn't some fairy tale ending. It was actually the beginning of a whole new set of massive struggles. They had to build a market economy from scratch, all while facing a crippling economic blockade from their neighbors and deal with a conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh that was about to boil over. In this conflict, this has been the single issue that has defined modern Armenia. It's a painful, complicated mess that goes back to how the Soviets drew their maps. It has shaped everything, their foreign policy, their security, their very sense of self in the world today, and it's led to just devastating wars. Which brings us to today. The history of Armenia is just this powerful testament to the endurance of a people. I mean, after thousands of years of dealing with empires, surviving a genocide, and enduring decades of conflict, the question of how this ancient nation keeps pushing forward, keeps writing its future, well, that remains the central defining challenge of its incredible story.